Millionaire marries a fake wife to honor his mother's last words. But the woman he chose changes his fate. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's return to our main character. The sky over Manhattan was heavy with gray clouds, a late autumn drizzle tapping softly against the stained glass windows of St. Andrew's Cathedral. Inside, the pews were lined with solemn faces dressed in black, the scent of lilies mixed with candle wax, and the sound of the organ pressed like a weight on every heart. At the very front, beside the casket draped in white roses, sat Alexander Reed, 34 years old, sharp jawline, dark tailored suit, and an expression carved in stone. He didn't cry. He hadn't cried once since the night his mother passed away in her sleep. But his silence, the way his hand clenched and unclenched against the polished wood of the pew, spoke louder than tears. His mother had been his anchor, the only family who mattered, and now she was gone. The priest's voice echoed gently through the cathedral. Mary Reed leaves behind a legacy of kindness, faith, and a wish for her son. Alexander's eyes flicked up. He knew what was coming. The will had been read earlier that morning. Hidden among the legal pages of estate distribution, trust funds, and charitable donations was a single handwritten note in his mother's own elegant script. "My son, you've built empires but live alone. Promise me you won't face this world empty-hearted. Before your 35th birthday, marry someone worthy of sharing your name. Only then can you inherit the family estate and keep our home alive." No. Her last words, a command wrapped in love, now echoed like chains around his chest. When the service ended, Alexander stood outside the cathedral's stone steps, cold drizzle seeping into his collar. His lawyer, Mr. Halpern, a man with round glasses and a voice always too polite, approached. "Alex," he said carefully, "you know what this means. The house in Connecticut, the estate without a wife, it passes to your cousin Nathan, and Nathan is less than discreet about what he intends to do with it." Alexander's lips pressed into a hard line. "I know exactly what it means." His voice was low, sharp. "And I'll be damned if Nathan lays a single finger on my mother's home." Halpern hesitated. "Then we'll need to act fast. You're 34. The clock is ticking. You'll need a marriage license within the year." Alexander's jaw flexed. He turned away, scanning the city lights bleeding through the drizzle. "Finally," he muttered, "find me someone. Anyone. This isn't about love. This is about honoring her." 2 miles away, in a cramped diner on the Lower East Side, Claire Bennett pressed her hands against the counter, staring at the overdue bills stacked like accusations in front of her. The diner smelled of burnt coffee and frying bacon, but none of it comforted her. Her father's medical expenses were piling up, and the landlord had already warned that one more missed payment meant eviction. She was 26, working double shifts as a waitress, and still drowning. Her worn sneakers squeaked against the greasy floor as she paced, lips moving as she calculated numbers that never seemed to add up. "Claire," the manager barked from the kitchen door. "Table 4's been waiting 10 minutes. She grabbed the coffee pot, pasted on a tired smile, and headed to the booth. But inside, her chest ached. How much longer could she keep this up? That night, she returned to her tiny apartment, only to find a letter slipped under the door. Final notice. She closed her eyes, throat tight. Her father coughed in the next room, and she bit her lip so hard it almost drew blood. "I need a miracle," she whispered to herself. The miracle came the next morning. Claire was wiping down the counter when 2 men in suits walked in. They didn't look like customers. Their polished shoes squeaked against the tile, and their eyes scanned the place with cool detachment before landing on her. "Claire Bennett?" one asked. She froze. "Yes?" He handed her a card. "Mr. Reed would like to speak with you. Today." Her brows furrowed. "Mr. Reed? Who?" The man simply adjusted his cufflinks. "You'll want to hear his proposal." Hours later, Claire sat stiffly in the back of a Blacktown car, her second-hand jacket pulled tight as the city rolled past. Her stomach twisted with nerves, She had no idea why a billionaire CEO wanted to see her. When the car finally stopped, she stepped into the marble lobby of Reed Enterprises. It felt like another world, polished floors that gleamed like mirrors, walls of glass, the distant hum of money and power. Employees moved briskly in tailored suits, their eyes flicking over her thrift store clothes with faint curiosity. And then she saw him. Alexander Reed stood at the far end of the lobby, hands in his pockets, posture effortless but commanding. His gaze locked onto hers, piercing, unreadable. He didn't smile. "Miss Bennett," he said, his deep voice steady. "Thank you for coming." She swallowed. "What is this about?" He studied her for a long moment before speaking. "I'll be blunt. I need a wife. Not for love. For a contract. You'll be paid generously, your debts cleared, your father's medical bills handled. In return, you'll marry me." The word struck her like a slap. "I what? Are you serious?" He didn't flinch. "Deadly serious. This is not romance, Miss Bennett. This is business. Think of it as a contract, a role you'll play. And once it's done, you'll walk away with enough to rebuild your life." Her mind spun. A billionaire stranger asking her to marry him for money, for convenience, for something she couldn't even process. Claire's hands trembled against her lap. She wanted to scream, to laugh, to run. But then she thought of her father, coughing in the dark apartment. The eviction notice crumpled on the counter. Her voice came out hoarse. "Why me?" Alexander's eyes softened for a fraction of a second, then hardened again. "Because you look like someone who has nothing left to lose." The silence between them stretched, heavy, suffocating. Finally, Claire took a shaky breath. "If I say yes," she whispered, "what happens next?" His answer was cold, final, and sealed both their fates. "Then we sign." The pen in Claire's hand trembled. The sleek contract lay open on the polished mahogany desk of Alexander Reed's office. His signature already marked the bottom line in bold black strokes, sharp and final. She stared at the paper, her reflection caught in the glass tabletop. Her thrift store blouse looked out of place against the gleaming skyline behind him. Every fiber of her being told her to get up, walk out, and never look back. But then she thought of her father, his coughs rattling through their tiny apartment. The eviction notice taped to the fridge, the bills stacking like tombstones on the counter. Her throat burned as she whispered, "You're serious. This is really happening." Alexander leaned back in his leather chair, his gaze unreadable. "I don't waste time on games, Miss Bennett. This is business. Nothing more." Claire's fingers brushed the page, tracing the bold clauses she had skimmed. No intimacy. No disclosure to the media. Appear at family events and board functions as my wife. Compensation guaranteed upon fulfillment of the 1-year contract. She forced herself to breathe. "You're offering to pay off every debt I have?" "Yes. Your father's treatments, your overdue rent, every cent. You'll never worry about money again. In return, you'll stand by my side until the contract ends. After that, you'll walk away with your freedom intact." Her laugh was hollow. "Do you hear how insane this sounds? Marrying a stranger because of paperwork?" His jaw tightened. "Because of loyalty. My mother's last words. I don't expect you to understand, but I will not let her legacy fall into my cousin's hands." The room fell silent. Only the hum of the city outside filled the gap between them. Claire stared at him, this man who spoke like stone, whose grief was hidden under layers of steel. She wanted to hate him, to call him cruel. But there was something in his eyes, just for a flicker, that looked more like loneliness than arrogance. She gripped the pen. Her signature came out shaky, uneven. When the last letter of her name landed on the page, she dropped the pen like it burned her fingers. "There," she whispered. "You have your wife." Alexander's expression didn't change, but his hand closed the folder with a snap, final and irrevocable. "Good. The wedding is in 1 week." The week passed like a blur. Claire's life, once marked by greasy diner uniforms and flickering light bulbs in a cramped apartment, transformed overnight. Designers arrived at her door with armfuls of gowns. A stylist trimmed her hair under the glow of expensive studio lights. Makeup artists whispered terms she barely understood: contour, shimmer, highlight, as though they were painting a masterpiece, not her tired face. She stared at the mirror in disbelief. The woman staring back at her looked polished, elegant, unreal. "Breathe," the stylist said cheerfully. "You'll get used to it." But Claire wasn't sure she ever would. The wedding itself was quiet, clinical, nothing like the fairy tales she had dreamed of as a child. No church bells, no tearful vows. Just the courthouse judge, Alexander in his tailored suit, and Claire in an ivory dress chosen from a rack that cost more than a year's rent. "Do you, Alexander Reed, take Claire Bennett as your lawful wife?" "I do." His voice was firm, steady. "Do you, Claire Bennett?" Her lips parted, the words stuck for a heartbeat. She swallowed hard, then forced them out. "I do." The judge's gavel came down. "By the authority vested in me by the state of New York, I now pronounce you husband and wife." Alexander turned to her, offering his hand with the precision of a man sealing a deal. "Welcome to your new life, Mrs. Reed." His palm was warm. Hers was ice. That night, the gates of the Reed estate opened for her. The car wound up a long driveway flanked by manicured hedges and fountains that glittered in the moonlight. The mansion loomed at the end, massive and silent, more museum than home. Claire pressed her forehead to the window, her breath fogging the glass. She had never seen anything like it. The doors opened to a marble foyer, chandeliers sparkling above, staircases sweeping in perfect symmetry. Portraits of the Reed family lined the walls, their painted eyes watching her as though judging her worth. Alexander handed his coat to a silent housekeeper and glanced at her. "You'll find everything you need upstairs. Dinner is at 7 sharp. Don't be late." She nodded mutely, following another servant up the stairs. Her new bedroom was larger than her entire apartment. A king-sized bed with silk sheets, windows tall enough to frame the stars, a closet already filled with clothes tailored to her size. It should have felt like a dream. Instead, it felt like a cage. She sat at the edge of the bed, fingers digging into the comforter. What have I done? The following days were a crash course in a world she didn't understand. Fork on the outside, knife on the right, chin up, shoulders back. The etiquette coach tapped her shoulder with a pointer stick. "Don't laugh too loudly. Smile, but never show too many teeth. And whatever you do, never drink red wine if you can't handle it." Claire tried. She really did. But she tripped in heels, confused the salad fork with the dessert fork, and once spilled champagne on an antique rug worth more than her childhood home. Alexander's expression remained unreadable through it all. But once, just once, she caught him smothering a laugh when she muttered under her breath, "Maybe I should just wear a sign that says, 'I'm pretending.'" His lips twitched, almost a smile, before he turned away. At night, Claire lay awake in the vast bed, staring at the ceiling carved with intricate patterns. She thought of her father, safe now in a private clinic Alexander had arranged. She thought of the diner, the apartment she would never return to. And she thought of the man sleeping down the hall, who had turned her life upside down with a single sentence. "I need a wife." This was survival, she told herself. Just survival. But in the quiet of her heart, doubt whispered something else. What if survival wasn't the only thing she wanted anymore? The first official test of their marriage arrived faster than Claire could prepare for. 3 nights after moving into the Reed estate, she found herself standing at the bottom of the grand staircase, dressed in a black evening gown that clung tighter than she liked, her hands trembling against the clutch Alexander's assistant had pressed into them. The car outside purred softly, waiting. Tonight was the company's annual charity gala, an event covered by every business magazine in New York. Claire's role was simple. Stand beside Alexander, smile, say nothing foolish, and look like she belonged. But as she descended the staircase, she felt like a fraud in borrowed shoes. Alexander glanced up from his phone, his gaze sweeping over her. For the briefest moment, his expression shifted, softer, almost startled. Then it hardened again. "Ready?" he asked. "No," she admitted, breath shaky. "Good," he said dryly. "Neither am I. Let's go." The gala hall glittered with chandeliers, polished marble, and the low hum of violins. Women in silk gowns and men in tailored tuxedos moved through the space like a sea of diamonds and whispers. Cameras flashed as the couple stepped inside, Alexander's hand resting lightly at Claire's back. She felt eyes on her, instantly curious, judging, whispering, "Who is she? Where did he find her?" Claire kept her chin up, forcing her lips into what she hoped passed as a confident smile. But her heart thundered in her chest. At the first table, a board member's wife leaned forward, her diamond necklace catching the light. "So, Claire, tell us, where did you study?" Claire froze. She hadn't studied anywhere beyond community college, and she certainly hadn't finished. Alexander's eyes flicked toward her, sharp, a warning. But something in her rebelled against lying. She cleared her throat. "I didn't. I've been working since I was 16. Waitressing, mostly." The woman's brows arched, the corners of her mouth curving into polite pity. "Oh." Laughter tittered around the table. Heat rose in Claire's cheeks. She wanted the ground to swallow her whole. But then another voice cut through. "And yet," Alexander said smoothly, his tone edged with steel, "she has more poise than half the room. Don't you agree?" The table fell silent. The woman's smile faltered. And for the first time that night, Claire exhaled. Later, after the charity auction, Claire stepped aside to catch her breath near the balcony. She pressed her hands to the railing, staring out at the city lights. "This is insane," she muttered. "Correct," Alexander's voice said behind her. She turned, startled. He stood there, a glass of champagne in his hand, his tie loosened, eyes sharp in the moonlight. "You handled yourself well tonight," he said. Her laugh was shaky. "I made a fool of myself." "You were honest." His voice softened just slightly. "That's rarer than you think." She studied him for a moment, trying to read the man behind the mask. The billionaire who spoke like a machine, yet defended her when the world tried to humiliate her. "Why me, really?" she asked quietly. "Out of all the women you could have chosen, models, socialites, heiresses, why me?" He stared at the skyline, his jaw tightening. "Because you're not them. You don't want my money. You want survival. That makes you reliable." "Oh." Her chest tightened. It wasn't romance. It wasn't love. But somehow, it felt like the closest thing to honesty she had heard from him yet. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of public appearances and private silences. At galas, at board dinners, at interviews staged for glossy magazines, Claire played the part of the dutiful wife. Her gown sparkled, her smile never wavered, her hand rested on Alexander's arm. She became an actress on the stage of high society, every movement rehearsed, every word measured. But behind closed doors, the truth was different. She ate dinner alone more often than not, Alexander buried in late meetings or locked in his study. The mansion felt cold, cavernous, filled with echoes instead of laughter. She wandered its halls like a ghost in silk slippers, her footsteps swallowed by marble. And yet, sometimes, cracks appeared in his armor. One night, after a particularly brutal board meeting, she found him sitting in the library, tie discarded, his face buried in his hands. "You look human," she said before she could stop herself. He glanced up, eyes tired but glinting with something raw. "Don't get used to it." She hesitated, then sat across from him. For the first time, silence between them didn't feel suffocating. It felt almost comfortable. But not everything was comfortable. The press had begun to whisper. Tabloids questioned the sudden marriage. Photos of Claire at the diner surfaced online, headlines screaming, "Who is the mystery Mrs. Reed?" Some praised her as a Cinderella story. Others mocked her as a gold digger. At breakfast one morning, she slammed the paper shut. "Do they ever stop?" Alexander didn't look up from his laptop. "Number, get used to it." Her temper flared. "Do you care about anything? Or is this whole marriage just numbers to you?" His jaw clenched. "It was never supposed to be more than that." Her voice dropped. "Maybe not for you." The silence that followed was louder than shouting. The turning point came one rainy afternoon. Claire had gone to visit her father at the clinic. He looked stronger, healthier, thanks to treatments she never could have afforded on her own. As she tucked the blanket around him, he clasped her hand. "You look different, sweetheart," he said softly. "Happier, like someone's taking care of you for once." Her throat tightened. She wanted to tell him everything, that it was fake, that it was business, that happiness was a role she was paid to play. But instead she smiled, kissed his forehead, and walked out into the rain with tears stinging her eyes. Back at the mansion, Alexander was waiting in the foyer. He looked at her dripping umbrella, at the redness in her eyes, and something in his expression shifted. "Claire," he said quietly, almost gently. But she brushed past him, her voice breaking. Don't pretend you care. She didn't see his hand curl into a fist at his side, the words he wanted to say dying on his lips. For the first time, the lines of their contract blurred, not because of public scrutiny, but because the act of pretending was becoming harder than the truth. The storm hit on the night of the Reed Foundation's spring gala. The ballroom shimmered with crystal chandeliers, gold-trimmed tables, and the buzz of New York's elite. Photographers clustered near the red carpet, their cameras flashing as Alexander and Claire stepped into view. He wore a midnight tuxedo, tailored sharp as a blade. She wore emerald silk, her hair swept into an elegant twist, diamonds glittering at her ears, borrowed, of course, from the Reed vault. Her hand rested lightly on his arm, the way the etiquette coach had drilled into her. To the world, they looked perfect, the powerful CEO and his stunning young wife. But Claire's smile was painted on, her heart pounding beneath the weight of every whispered rumor that swirled around them. She was a waitress, you know. A nobody. What's she doing here? Gold digger. He'll tire of her by Christmas. The whispers followed her as they crossed the ballroom, like smoke curling under the chandeliers. Alexander leaned down, his voice low enough only for her. Ignore them. Easy for you to say, she whispered back. They don't think you're the fraud. His jaw tightened. They don't matter. But Claire wasn't so sure. The speeches began. Donors raised glasses of champagne. The orchestra swelled. Claire sat beside Alexander at the head table, her hands folded neatly in her lap, forcing herself to look calm. Until a voice cut through the polite chatter. So tell us, Mrs. Reed, a man said loudly, his words tinged with mockery. What was it about Alexander that swept you off your feet? His charm or his bank account? The table went still. Every eye turned to her. Her face burned. She could feel the cameras zooming in, eager for a reaction. Alexander stiffened beside her, ready to intervene. But something in Claire snapped. She lifted her chin. Neither, she said, her voice steady, though her hands trembled under the table. It was the fact that he eats cereal at 2 a.m. when he can't sleep, that he gets headaches when he spends too many hours staring at spreadsheets, that he's human, even if people in this room forget it. Oh, the silence that followed was sharp. Then, surprisingly, a few people chuckled. A few even clapped. The tension broke. Alexander stared at her, astonished. For the first time in weeks, his lips curved into the ghost of a real smile. Later, as the guests danced and mingled, Claire slipped out to the balcony for air. The city stretched below, glittering and infinite. She gripped the railing, her chest tight. She didn't hear Alexander approach until he spoke. You didn't have to defend me. She turned, startled. Of course I did. They were tearing you apart. I'm used to it, he said quietly. Well, I'm not. Her voice shook. I'm not used to being a joke. I'm not used to everyone thinking I don't belong. But tonight, for once, I decided I didn't care what they thought. And maybe you shouldn't either. For a long moment, he just looked at her, the city lights reflecting in his eyes. Then he stepped closer, close enough that the warmth of him cut through the chill air. Claire, he said softly. It was the first time he had spoken her name like it meant something. Her breath caught. The space between them narrowed, electric, charged. For one heartbeat, she thought he might kiss her. But then his phone buzzed. He pulled back, the moment shattered. His voice hardened again. I have to take this. And just like that, the wall between them rose again. The next morning, headlines blazed across every newsstand. Mrs. Reed stuns gala with fiery defense of husband. From waitress to society, Queen Claire Reed wins the crowd. Claire gaped at the papers over breakfast, her coffee growing cold. They liked me? Alexander smirked faintly over his laptop. Looks like it. She laughed, shaking her head. Well, there's a first time for everything. For once, the silence between them wasn't heavy. It was almost easy. But ease never lasted long in the Reed household. That evening, while Claire was in the library, she overheard voices drifting from the study. Nathan Reed, Alexander's cousin, stood inside with a smirk that sent a chill down her spine. You really think this charade will hold up, Alex? Nathan sneered. A waitress playing the role of Mrs. Reed? The board won't buy it, the press won't buy it, I'll make sure of it. Alexander's reply was low, dangerous. Stay out of it, Nathan. Ouch. Nathan laughed. Oh, I intend to do more than that. I'll expose her. And when the world sees your little marriage for what it is, you'll lose everything. The estate, the company, all of it. Claire froze in the doorway, her blood running cold. She had known people doubted her. She had known whispers followed her. But now, someone was actively plotting to destroy not just her reputation but Alexander's entire legacy. And for the first time since she signed that contract, fear wasn't the only thing she felt. There was something else, something stronger. A determination to fight not just for survival, not just for money, but for the man she was beginning to see beneath the armor. The man who had asked her to be his wife, even if only on paper. The man who, against all reason, she no longer wanted to let down. The rain fell heavy the night Nathan made his move. Claire sat in the Reed Mansion's vast dining hall, the long mahogany table stretching like a runway between her and Alexander. Dinner had been quiet, too quiet. She picked at the roasted salmon on her plate, appetite gone. Across from her, Alexander scrolled through emails, his jaw locked tight. The silence broke when his phone buzzed again. He glanced at the screen, his eyes darkening. He stood abruptly. "I need to handle this." "Business?" Claire asked carefully. He hesitated. "Family." Before she could ask more, he strode out, leaving her alone with the echo of her own thoughts. The next morning, the newspapers screamed the headlines. Reed marriage a sham? Sources claim Alexander paid waitress to pose his wife. Claire's hands shook as she read. The words blurred, the photos, grainy shots of her in her diner uniform, her worn sneakers, her small apartment burned into her eyes. The tabloids framed it all as proof. Proof she wasn't a wife, but a fraud. The article quoted an anonymous insider. Claire didn't need a name. She knew it was Nathan. Her stomach dropped. This wasn't just rumor. This was war. When Alexander entered the breakfast room, he was already storm-eyed, jaw like stone. He slammed the paper down. "This is Nathan," he growled. "He's behind it." Claire's voice shook. "What happens now?" His eyes met hers, burning with fury, but laced with something else, something almost like regret. "The board meets tomorrow. They'll demand answers." She swallowed hard. "And what will you tell them? That you hired me to be your wife?" The silence stretched between them, heavy, suffocating. Finally he said, "Stay out of it. I'll handle this." But Claire knew. This wasn't something he could handle alone. That night, she wandered the mansion's halls, unable to sleep. Her footsteps echoed against marble. The portraits of Reed ancestors, staring down at her like judges. She paused at the library door and found Alexander inside, pacing, his tie loosened, a glass of whiskey untouched on the table. "You can't fight this on your own," she said softly. He spun, startled. For a moment, the steel mask slipped. She saw exhaustion etched into his face, the weight of grief and pressure pressing into his shoulders. "Claire," he said, his voice low, "I brought you into this mess. You don't owe me anything." Her chest tightened. "Maybe not, but I don't want to watch you lose everything because of me." He stared at her, silent. The space between them felt charged, fragile. And for the first time, he didn't push her away. The board meeting the next morning was chaos. The conference room buzzed with sharp voices, papers slapped against the table, photographers swarming outside the glass doors. Nathan sat smugly among them, his tie perfectly knotted, his smirk dripping poison. Alexander stood at the head of the table, his posture a wall of iron. Claire sat beside him, her palms sweating against the leather armrest. "Mr. Reed," a board member said sharply, "these allegations are serious. If this marriage is a facade, your credibility is compromised. Investors are already calling." Nathan leaned forward. "The truth is simple. He married a waitress, paid her to pose, just to meet the inheritance clause. It's deception. It's fraud." Gasps rippled across the table. Claire's heart pounded. She felt Alexander stiffen beside her, ready to speak, but before he could, she rose. Her voice rang clear. "It's true." The room froze. Every head turned to her. Claire's hands shook, but her gaze was steady. "When Alexander asked me to marry him, it wasn't for love. It was for a contract. I was drowning in debt. My father was sick. I agreed because I needed the money." The board erupted in whispers, shocked and scandalized. Nathan's grin widened. But Claire wasn't finished. She lifted her chin. What I didn't expect was to find a man who cared more about honoring his mother's last wish than protecting his empire. What I didn't expect was to see the weight he carries every day, the loneliness he hides. You call it fraud. I call it sacrifice. Because he could have chosen anyone, any socialite, any heiress. But he chose me. And maybe that makes him foolish. Or maybe it makes him more human than any of us want to admit. The room went silent. Even Nathan's smirk faltered. Alexander stared at her, something unspoken burning in his eyes. The chairman cleared his throat. That will be enough. We've heard enough for today. Outside the boardroom, cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. Alexander guided Claire through the chaos, his hand firm at her back. When the doors of the elevator closed, silence wrapped around them. You didn't have to do that, he said quietly. Yes, I did. Her voice shook. Because for once, I wanted to stop pretending. His hand brushed hers, tentative, uncertain. For the first time since the contract began, neither of them pulled away. That evening, rain lashed against the windows of the mansion. Claire stood in the library, staring at the fire crackling in the hearth. Alexander entered, his steps quiet, his gaze fixed on her. You were brave today, he said. She turned, her heart hammering. I was honest. He stepped closer, his expression softer than she had ever seen. Claire. Her breath caught as his hand brushed her cheek, gentle, trembling. For the first time, the space between them closed, not with pretense, not with contracts, but with something real. The kiss was slow, searching, as though neither quite believed it was happening. But when it broke, his forehead rested against hers, his voice raw. This was never supposed to happen, he whispered. She smiled faintly, her eyes wet. Maybe it was. And in that moment, the storm outside raged, but inside, something fragile, something undeniable, finally began to bloom. The kiss had changed everything. For weeks, Claire had told herself this marriage was nothing but paper and signatures, a transaction, a survival plan. But now, as she lay awake in the vast bedroom of the Reed estate, she could still feel the echo of Alexander's lips on hers, the warmth of his hand against her cheek. Sleep didn't come easy. Her heart wouldn't let her. Down the hall, Alexander sat in his study long after midnight, the glow of his laptop screen painting shadows across his face. He wasn't reading emails anymore. He was staring at the fireplace, lost. The kiss had shaken him too. He had promised himself not to care, not to feel. And yet, every time he closed his eyes, he saw Claire's face, honest and unguarded, when she defended him in front of the board. She wasn't supposed to mean anything, but she did. The next morning, the papers told a different story. Mrs. Reed saves CEO with emotional speech. From waitress to warrior, Claire Reed wins over the board. Claire stared at the headlines, half in shock. They believe me? Alexander poured coffee, his expression unreadable. For now. She looked up at him, cautious. And you? His eyes met hers, lingering a moment too long before he answered. I believe you more than anyone. Her chest tightened. The silence stretched, thick with words neither dared to say. But not everyone was convinced. Nathan wasn't finished. At a private dinner days later, Claire spotted him across the table, his smirk aimed like a blade. He raised a glass in her direction. To Mrs. Reed, a remarkable performance. Her hand clenched around her napkin. She forced a smile, but her heart raced. He was planning something. She could feel it. When the guests dispersed, Nathan cornered her in the corridor, his voice a hiss. Enjoy your little fairy tale while it lasts. One slip, one mistake, and I'll tear it all down. You don't belong here, and everyone will know it. Claire's pulse hammered. Why are you doing this? Because it should have been mine, Nathan spat. The company, the estate, everything, and soon it will be. She shoved past him, her legs shaking. Alexander was waiting at the car. He saw her pale face, the tension in her shoulders. What did he say? Nothing I didn't already know, she whispered. But inside, dread coiled tighter. Days turned into weeks. And in the quiet moments, Alexander and Claire began to slip past the boundaries of their contract. She found him in the garden late at night, standing where the roses bloomed under lantern light. He admitted he came there because his mother used to walk those paths every evening, humming old songs. Claire listened, her heart aching for the boy he had once been, the man he was still trying to be. Another night, she joined him on the balcony, overlooking the city. The skyline glowed like a sea of fireflies. For once, his voice lost its steel. "Do you ever wonder," he asked, "if all of this, the money, the power, is worth it?" She looked at him, saw the cracks in his armor, and answered honestly, "Only if you have someone to share it with." He didn't respond, but his hand brushed hers on the railing, lingering longer than it should have. Still, Nathan's threats loomed like storm clouds. The board grew restless again, whispers spreading of votes and replacements. Nathan fueled the fire, planting rumors, feeding journalists. Every move Alexander made was scrutinized. One afternoon, as Claire walked into the company lobby, she overheard two employees whispering, "She's just here for the money. I heard Nathan has proof." Her chest tightened. Proof? Did Nathan have something more than gossip? That night, she couldn't hide the worry in her face. "Talk to me," Alexander pressed. She hesitated, then told him what she'd heard. His jaw clenched. He's bluffing. But the flicker in his eyes betrayed him. He wasn't sure. The pressure came to a head at a charity dinner 2 weeks later. The ballroom glittered with chandeliers, but the atmosphere was tense, eyes flicking between Alexander and Claire. The whispers were louder now, suspicion thick in the air. During the dinner, a journalist stood and called out, "Mr. Reed, is it true your marriage is nothing more than a contract?" The room gasped. Claire froze. Cameras turned. Flashbulbs popped. Alexander rose slowly, his gaze sweeping the crowd, his voice cut sharp and cold. "My marriage is my business, and anyone questioning it should consider whether they're more interested in truth or in destroying reputations." The journalist faltered, but the damage was done. The whispers grew louder. Claire's hand shook under the table. She wanted to stand, to speak again, to defend him. But before she could, Nathan stepped into the spotlight, smiling like a viper. "I think the people deserve to know," Nathan said smoothly. "They deserve honesty. Isn't that what your wife preached to this very board?" The crowd leaned forward, hungry for scandal. Alexander's glare could have shattered glass. "Careful, Nathan." But Nathan only smiled wider. That night, back at the mansion, Claire paced the library, her nerves raw. "This won't end," she whispered. "He's not going to stop until he destroys you." Alexander's hands clenched at his sides. "Let him try." She turned on him, her voice breaking. "You think you can fight him alone? But you can't. He'll twist everything me, you, us." For a moment, the silence was unbearable. Then Alexander stepped closer, his voice low, fierce. "Then we stop pretending. No more contracts, no more lies. If he wants to tear us apart, he'll have to face the truth." Claire's heart stopped. "The truth?" His eyes burned into hers. "That somewhere along the way, I stopped seeing you as a contract, and I started seeing you as the only thing I can't lose." Her breath caught, tears stinging her eyes. The contract had brought them together, but now the contract meant nothing. Because what bound them wasn't ink on paper anymore. It was something deeper, stronger, something that Nathan could never destroy. The days after Alexander's confession moved like a drumbeat, louder, faster, pushing toward something inevitable. Claire woke each morning with the echo of his words still in her chest. "You're the only thing I can't lose." But she also woke with a knot of dread, because Nathan wasn't finished. It happened at the quarterly shareholders' gathering, held in the glass tower of Reed Enterprises. The room shimmered with steel and glass, a skyline spread out behind the floor-to-ceiling windows. The city below sparkled, but inside, the air was sharp, tense. Claire stood beside Alexander as he prepared his address, her emerald dress chosen carefully, her hair pinned into a perfect chignon. She had learned how to play the part. But tonight, something felt wrong. Nathan sat among the board members, his smirk already fixed, his fingers tapping on a sleek leather folder in front of him, a predator waiting for the perfect moment. Alexander's voice filled the room, confident and steady, as he presented quarterly growth figures, strategies, and projections. The shareholders listened, some nodding, some skeptical, and then Nathan stood. "Fellow shareholders," he said smoothly, his voice carrying like oil over water. "Before we put our trust in Mr. Reed's leadership, there is a matter of honesty we must address." Whispers rippled instantly. Nathan lifted the folder. I have here evidence that this so-called marriage, this union presented as a story of loyalty and legacy, is nothing more than a transaction, a sham designed to fulfill the inheritance clause. He opened the folder with a flourish. Inside lay photographs, grainy shots of Claire leaving the diner in her old uniform, her eviction notice pinned to the apartment door, even copies of hospital bills for her father. Ladies and gentlemen, Nathan continued, our beloved Mrs. Reed did not fall in love. She was bought. The room erupted. Cameras flashed, voices clashed, accusations flew. Claire's stomach dropped. Her heart pounded in her ears. She wanted to vanish. But Alexander didn't flinch. He stepped forward, his jaw hard, his voice sharp as steel. Enough, Nathan. You've made your point. Nathan sneered. No, cousin. The point is this. Your marriage is a lie, and a man who lies about his own wife cannot be trusted to lead this company. The board buzzed in agreement, heads nodding, whispers hissing. Claire felt the ground tilt beneath her. This was it, the downfall Nathan had promised. But then Alexander's voice cut through, calm but fierce. Yes, the marriage began as a contract. Gasps filled the room. He didn't look away. I won't deny it. My mother's will demanded I marry, and I did. But what Nathan doesn't understand, what none of you seem to see, is that sometimes what begins as an arrangement becomes something more. He reached for Claire's hand, pulling her to stand beside him. She trembled, but his grip was firm, grounding. This woman, he said, his voice low but carrying through the room, is not a fraud. She is the only person in this world who has stood beside me when she had every reason to walk away. She has been mocked, humiliated, judged, and yet she stayed. Not for money, not for status, but because she has more integrity than anyone in this room. The silence was electric. Nathan's face darkened. Touching speech. But sentiment doesn't run a company. Alexander's gaze turned cold. Neither does greed. No, the vote was postponed. But the damage was done. The press swarmed as soon as they left the building, shoving microphones, shouting questions. Mrs. Reed, are you really just a paid wife? Alexander, is this marriage a lie? Do you love her, or is this all for the inheritance? Alexander shielded her with his arm, guiding her into the car, his jaw tight. Inside the car, silence pressed between them. Claire stared out the window, tears burning her eyes. He'll never stop. Nathan will keep coming until he ruins you. Alexander turned to her, his voice raw. Then let him try, because the only way he wins is if we let him tear us apart. Her chest tightened, her eyes meeting his. And in that moment, she knew whatever this was, however it had begun, she wasn't going to run. But Nathan wasn't finished. 2 nights later, Claire was at the mansion, pacing the grand hall, when the front doors burst open. Nathan strode in, flanked by 2 board members and a journalist with a camera already rolling. This ends tonight, Nathan declared, his voice dripping triumph. The world will see what you are. Alexander stepped into the foyer, his presence filling the space, his eyes blazing. You don't belong here. Oh, but I do, Nathan sneered. He gestured at the camera. This is live. Millions are watching. Let's hear it from her lips. Claire, tell the world, was this marriage real, or were you bought? The camera swung to her, the light blinded, the red recording dot glaring. Her heart thundered. She could lie, deny, hide, or she could speak the truth. She lifted her chin. Yes, it began as a contract. Nathan's grin widened, but she didn't stop. But it didn't end there. Because somewhere along the way, I stopped pretending. I stopped seeing Alexander Reed as a deal, and I started seeing him as the man I couldn't walk away from. Call it foolish, call it reckless, but don't call it fake. Because nothing has ever been more real to me than this. The foyer fell silent. Even the cameraman hesitated, his lens wavering. Alexander's eyes burned into hers, raw and unguarded. He stepped forward, his voice steady, sure. You wanted the truth, Nathan. There at Island, and if the world can't accept that, so be it. But I will not let you destroy her. Or us. Nathan's face twisted, his victory crumbling. The board members exchanged uncertain glances. The journalist lowered his camera, suddenly unsure. The balance of power had shifted. And for the first time, Nathan realized his war might not be so easy to win. That night, When the doors finally closed and the house fell quiet, Claire stood in the library, her heart still racing. Alexander entered, his expression softer than she'd ever seen. "You didn't have to say all that," he murmured. "Yes, I did," she whispered back. "Because it's the truth." The silence that followed wasn't heavy this time. It was warm, alive, and when he reached for her hand, she didn't hesitate. Because the war with Nathan wasn't over. But something stronger had been born in its fire, something that no rumor, no camera, no smear could take away. Something real. The mansion felt different after that night, warmer somehow, though the air was still heavy with tension. The world outside buzzed with speculation, but inside, Claire and Alexander had crossed a line. They were no longer strangers bound by ink and paper. They were something neither of them had expected to become: partners. Still, the storm hadn't passed. Nathan was circling, his pride wounded, his ambition sharper than ever. And Claire knew he would not stop until he had Alexander stripped of everything: his company, his estate, his name. A week later, the Reed Foundation held its annual One World Gala, a massive charity event broadcast on national television. It was meant to celebrate humanitarian work, but everyone knew the cameras weren't there for the cause. They were there for Alexander and his controversial wife. The ballroom at the Hilton Grand was dressed in gold and white. Journalists lined the red carpet, flashbulbs firing as Alexander and Claire stepped out of the Blacktown car. His hand slipped around hers, firm and steady, and for the first time, she held it not as part of an act, but because she wanted to. The reporters shouted, "Claire, is your marriage still under investigation? Alexander, are you stepping down as CEO? Is it true Nathan Reed plans to challenge you in court?" Alexander ignored them, his stride purposeful, his gaze set forward. Claire followed, her heart pounding, her smile faint but real. Inside, the air buzzed with wealth and power. Crystal chandeliers glowed above tables of executives, senators, and celebrities. Every eye turned as the Reeds entered. Nathan was already there, his smirk slicing across the room. He wore his tuxedo-like armor, his champagne flute tilted in mock salute. Claire squeezed Alexander's hand. "He's going to try something." Alexander's jaw flexed. "Let him." The night unfolded with speeches, music, and a high-stakes auction. Claire played her part, smiling at donors, shaking hands, fielding polite questions. But her thoughts were elsewhere on the simmering threat across the room. It happened during the keynote address. Nathan rose from his seat, interrupting the speaker. His voice carried, smooth and poisonous. "Ladies and gentlemen, forgive me, but before we applaud Mr. Reed's so-called philanthropy, shouldn't we demand honesty from the man leading this empire?" The crowd stilled. Cameras swung toward him. Nathan's smirk deepened. This marriage, this fairy tale, was never real. It was a contract, a transaction, a waitress bought to play the part of a wife. And I can prove it. Gasps rippled through the ballroom. Claire's pulse thundered. Her first instinct was to shrink, to hide. But then she remembered Alexander's words. "We stop pretending." She rose, her heels clicking against the marble as she stepped onto the stage. The crowd murmured, shocked by her audacity. "Yes," she said, her voice clear, unwavering. "It began as a contract. I won't deny that." Nathan's grin widened, sure of victory. But Claire's next words cut it from his face. What Nathan doesn't understand is that no contract can force a heart. No paper can dictate trust, or sacrifice, or love. And love is exactly what I found. Not in the wealth, not in the power, but in a man who honored his mother even when it nearly cost him everything. A man who fights for what's right, even when the world calls it foolish. The room went silent. Claire turned, her eyes locking on Alexander's. "And if anyone doubts this marriage, then doubt me. Because I am the proof. I'm still here, not because of money, not because of a deal, but because I choose him, every day." The crowd erupted in applause. Not polite, hesitant applause, thunderous, genuine, rolling across the hall. Cameras flashed. Guests stood. The speaker stepped back in awe. And for the first time, Nathan faltered, his face drained, his grip on the champagne glass tightening until it nearly cracked. Backstage, away from the roar of applause, Alexander pulled Claire into his arms. His voice was hoarse, shaken. "You didn't have to." "Yes, I did," she whispered fiercely, "because I'm done hiding." He pressed his forehead to hers, his breath unsteady. Claire. And then he kissed her. Not careful, not restrained, but with the weight of every moment they had endured. The contract was gone. The lies were gone. All that remained was the truth they had tried so hard to deny. But the night wasn't over. Nathan stormed backstage, his composure shattered. "You think this is over?" he snarled. "You embarrassed me, but you won't win. The board will never accept her. The company will be mine." Alexander turned, his arm still around Claire, his gaze like ice. "You've underestimated us for the last time." Nathan sneered. "And what will you do? Smile your way through? Parade your little waitress wife until the cameras get bored?" Alexander stepped closer, his voice deadly calm. I'll show them who you really are. Every shady deal, every stolen fund, every piece of corruption you've tried to bury. It's over, Nathan." Nathan's smirk cracked. For the first time, fear flickered in his eyes. Claire held her breath. She realized then that Alexander hadn't been blind to Nathan's schemes. He had been waiting, gathering, preparing, and now the moment had come. The next morning, newspapers across New York bore the headlines. Claire Reed silences doubters with stunning speech. Alexander Reed promises full audit of Reed Enterprises amid cousin's alleged misconduct. The tide had turned, but Claire knew one thing: the final battle with Nathan was still ahead. And when it came, she and Alexander would have to face it together, not as strangers bound by a contract, but as something real, something unbreakable. The weeks after the gala felt like the final act of a long, brutal play. Nathan had been cornered. The whispers of corruption were no longer just rumors, they were facts, pulled from records Alexander had been quietly gathering for months. Transactions hidden in shell companies, kickbacks disguised as consulting fees, bribes signed with Nathan's name. The board of Reed Enterprises convened in a meeting that would decide everything. The mahogany tables stretched like a battlefield. Cameras waited outside, hungry for a headline. Nathan strutted in, his smirk brittle but still intact, as if arrogance alone could hold him together. Alexander entered last, Claire at his side. She wasn't just an accessory now. She was his anchor. The chairman cleared his throat. "Mr. Nathan Reed, the evidence presented against you is serious. Embezzlement, fraud, misuse of company funds. Do you deny it?" Nathan laughed, sharp and brittle. "Fabrications. Do you really believe him? He's desperate. He married a waitress to cling to his inheritance." All eyes turned to Alexander. He didn't flinch. "Yes, I married Claire under a contract. I've never hidden that. But what began as a contract has become my truth. And unlike Nathan, I have nothing to hide." He placed a folder on the table, sliding it forward. "Here are the records. Signed, time-stamped. Every crime Nathan hoped to bury." Lo! The board members flipped through the pages, their faces hardening. Nathan's smirk cracked, then collapsed. "This is a setup," he shouted. "You can't do this." "Security," the chairman interrupted. Two guards entered, placing hands firmly on Nathan's shoulders. His protests echoed as he was dragged out, his voice breaking into rage. "This isn't over, Alex. You'll regret this." But it was over. The gavel came down. Nathan Reed was expelled from the company, his shares frozen pending investigation. And in that moment, Alexander exhaled for the first time in months, maybe years. Outside the building, the press swarmed. Claire braced herself for the questions, the flashes, the accusations. But this time, Alexander didn't shield her. He took her hand, raised it, and spoke into the sea of microphones. "This is my wife," he said, his voice steady, strong. "We began in a way I would never have chosen. But what we've built, what we've fought for, is real, and I will spend the rest of my life proving it." The crowd roared with questions, but Claire barely heard them. Her chest tightened, her eyes burned, and for once, she didn't care who was watching. She leaned into him, her voice trembling, but sure. "Then start proving it now." And in front of the cameras, the reporters, the city, he kissed her. Not as an act, not as a performance, but as a man choosing the woman he loved. Weeks later, the Reed estate no longer felt like a museum. The marble halls echoed with warmth instead of silence. Claire's laughter filled the rooms that had once been empty. The staff no longer treated her like an outsider. They smiled, they confided, they called her Mrs. Reed with affection. not obligation. Her father, stronger now, visited on weekends, sitting in the garden with a blanket over his knees. He told Alexander stories from his youth, and Alexander listened not as a CEO, not as a millionaire, but as a son-in-law who wanted to belong. The board stabilized. Investors returned. The newspapers shifted their tune. For the first time, headlines weren't about scandal, they were about resilience, redemption, and the unlikely couple who had weathered it all. One evening, months after Nathan's downfall, Alexander led Claire to the gallery he had renovated in the city. The walls were lined with photographs, images from charity work, from community projects, from lives changed by the Reed Foundation. In the center of the gallery, beneath a spotlight, stood a glass case. Inside was a single object, their torn marriage contract. Preserved between two panes of crystal, Claire's breath caught. "You kept it?" she whispered. Alexander nodded. "Because that piece of paper started everything, but it doesn't define us anymore. It's just proof of how far we've come." Her eyes blurred with tears. "So what does define us?" He pulled a small box from his pocket, his voice soft but certain. "This." Her hands trembled as he opened it. Inside was a simple diamond ring, not flashy, not ostentatious, but timeless. "Claire Bennett Reed," he said, his eyes never leaving hers. "I don't want contracts or conditions. I don't want appearances or obligations. I just want you. Will you marry me not as a deal, not as a duty, but as the woman I love?" Tears spilled freely down her cheeks. She laughed through them, her voice breaking. "Yes, yes, of course I will." The crowd around them, friends, colleagues, family, erupted in applause. But Claire only heard the thud of her heartbeat and the whisper of his promise as he slid the ring onto her finger. Their second wedding was nothing like the first. No courthouse, no quick signatures, no silence. Instead, it was a small ceremony in the garden of the estate. Lanterns hung from the trees, roses lined the path, and music drifted softly in the evening air. Claire walked down the aisle in a gown of soft lace, her father at her side, his eyes shining with pride. Alexander waited beneath an arch of white roses, his gaze fixed on her as though nothing else in the world existed. When the vows came, Alexander's voice broke only once. "I promise you, there will be no more contracts between us, only choices, and every day I will choose you." Claire's reply was steady, her tears shining in the twilight. "And I will choose you, not because I have to, but because I want to. Because somehow, out of all the lies, we found the only truth that matters." The kiss that sealed their vows was met with cheers, with laughter, with joy, and for once, Claire didn't feel like a fraud, or a guest, or a shadow in Alexander Reed's world. She felt like home. As the night faded into stars, Alexander and Claire stood hand in hand, watching their guests dance under the lanterns. He leaned close, his whisper meant only for her. "The best deal I ever made was the one that turned out to be real." She smiled, resting her head against his shoulder. "The best mistake I ever made was saying yes." "No." And with the echoes of laughter around them, with the glow of love in their hearts, they knew the story was no longer about contracts, inheritance, or proving themselves to the world. It was about them, and it was only the beginning.